This is the final panel. So this is traditionally how we close People Analytics World in Europe, where we very much reflect on the past 2 days and then look forward to the future. But there will be plenty of opportunities for people in the audience to ask questions of the panelists here, but also maybe to offer their own perspectives, perhaps on the questions that we're going to ask. We've got a great panel here. We've got a distinguished panel and a variety of different experiences. So I'm going to go along that's nearest to me. So we've got Julie Peck, who is the CEO of Talent Neuron, so very much helping to provide maybe a technology vendor perspective. We've then got in the middle two heads of People Analytics, Anthony Ferreras from Pinterest and Bridie Lear, who many of you would have heard speak this morning from Expedia. And at the end there, we have Jane Datta, who until last year, wasn't it? Last year was the CHRO of NASA. So a pretty distinguished organisation as well. So as I said, we're going to look at let's look at the last 2 days. We've heard lots of different things over the last 2 days. Probably all of us are trying to reflect on what we've heard and maybe take away some learnings from that. So we're going to start with that really. Just going to ask each of the panelists really, what have been your key reflections or takeaways from the past 2 days? And Jane, I'll start with you.
Sure. So overall, I'd say that I think the state of the art for people analytics is actually increased significantly over the last 4 or 5 years. So I was listening out for things like the range of things that people analytics professionals do, the affiliations they have, and the balance that they are striking between choosing projects and knowing what to push. So the state of the art is improving. If I were to call it sort of in the life cycle, I'd say maybe we've moved from being an elementary school student to now we're in late teens. However, the caveat is that we have a toddler in our midst as well, that toddler being AI. And so trying to figure out what to do with toddler is going to introduce some wrinkles into this, challenges and opportunities. The only other thing I'd like to share is that I thought there were some really wonderful, small moments of clarity that came up. Like data is innocent was one of them. I wanted to bring that one back again because in that is such a beautiful sort of simple way of explaining why understanding data is so very important. And so that's one. And the other one with my workforce planning hat on, because that's the function that I spent most of the time in, was the build, buy, borrow, bounce, break, bot. Thank you. Which again is a real extension of the kind of build, buy, borrow, which when I was there, that's what we talked about all the time, build, buy, borrow. And now it's sort of extended out to reflect some of the changes that are already upon us in kind of bringing in more automation, more types of automation. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Jane. I'll come to Julie next. Julie, obviously you've had many conversations, I imagine, outside with attendees over the last 2 days. Love to hear your reflections as well.
Yeah, actually, I liked the analogy of a toddler coming into the mix because it's like a toddler on a tear. Right? It's like you just got things all settled down and you feel like you're finally making progress. And then into the room comes this maniac 3-year-old ripping everything around and like pressing every button in every room. And now you're like, so I think there's both a real challenge in that. And I think that there's also an opportunity because that toddler is changing the world, even if it's in chaos right now. These moments of chaos, they come in waves and they do forever change the way business is done. And I've been around I don't know what the lights are like up here, but pretty sure you can see all this like bags under my eyes. I've been around long enough to have absorbed about 3 toddlers. Even back to the days when like the .com, the internet was becoming mainstream. When I was in HR, which was forever ago, we didn't even have email yet. I know, it was a really long time ago.
We date ourselves.
But I mean, but then the internet came about, and it was a toddler, and it was disruptive, and it was irresponsible, and it was sloppy, and it was poorly done, and it was unsecure, and all of that. And yet, it forced the world to change around it. And the same thing is happening. And then the appification of the world, the whole idea of there's got to be an app for that. Like digital natives, young people who grew up with all of this stuff as an extension of their bodies and souls, if they even have souls anymore. This idea, like I had a COO in one of my last companies that I ran who was 27. And I would go, we have a huge, huge problem. She goes, there's got to be an app for that. I'm like, oh, come on. And there was, right? And all those apps like proliferated from these toddlers who came in and said, I'm doing this totally differently. And they were messing up everything that us grown-ups had set in place. We're in that same space now. And if we can figure out how to harness the brilliance of that while also trying to keep the toddler from like literally breaking everything in the entire house, we will forever be in a transformed business world that is very much anchored in the people, the skills, the knowledge, and the talent as being the core focus, and not raw materials and the physical supply chains and things like that. We are evolving into a knowledge universe where the knowledge is housed in people, and people figure out how to use tools. And this toddler is a tool. It is not a person. And we will figure out one way or another how to use it, and how to use it for both good and evil. But I think for me, it's a really fun time to be in the room with this toddler wreaking havoc, because I can feel the electricity of this being the next wave of what forever changes how companies operate.
I think we're going to be taking this toddler analogy a little bit further.
No, I know.
But the toddlers that you two have described actually sound like my teenage children, actually. So Anthony, I'm going to come to you. Reflections on the past 2 days.
I'll try to list them quickly. I'll give a shout out to my friend Chris over here, who did a really good job about bringing us right back to the simplicity that I think people analytics should be for our audience, our stakeholders. I thought that was an incredible reminder of it doesn't take much, and the little bit or the simplicity of some of the things that we can do can go a long way. Where a lot of us are really trying to mature, and put this in quotations, mature what we think by maturity. In many cases, that curve that we see that started with Burson, I think it was. Burson, yeah, and to try to achieve that, value, that big value. But I think what we're missing along the way is we have provided a whole lot of value trying to get to that, and we shouldn't forget about those things. So thanks for the reminder, Chris.
And Bridie, I promise you won't have to go last on the next question.
I'm not sure where to go after the toddler analogy. It was so good.
Oh, I forgot to mention toddlers.
So good. So good. But some of the things I'm reflecting on as a kind of people analytics leader is, the fact that we need to be really thoughtful about buy versus build with the toddler in the house, because how we manage that, what that requires. We had a few discussions about, do we need new skills? This is the third time I've done a people analytics leadership role. I have a playbook. I play the playbook. And now I'm starting to think, is the playbook changing? Which is a good thing. Continuous improvement is always a good thing. But, do we need less technical skills, more translator skills, et cetera, with the advent of these things? The second thing that I took away from this is it's so important for us to spend time together as a community and learn from each other and discuss. I think the power of a lot of this is in the discussions we have outside, the connections we make afterwards, as well as the formal presentations or outside in from vendors, et cetera. So it reminded me again that it's important to take time out of the day job and do this together.
You mentioned good and evil, and with the toddlers again. We're going to look a little bit about that, not necessarily good and evil, but we're going to look at the future. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to talk about something that excites them about the future of people analytics and its role, and maybe a concern as well. So we'll start with the We should really start with the negative and get that out of the way. We're going to start with the positive, though. Why not? And then we'll do the concern after. So I'll start with you, Julie, and I'm a bit worried about where this is going to go with the toddlers. So as we look to the future of people analytics, the future of HR, the future of work, if you want to call it that as well, what excites you most?
Yeah, I think what excites me most is the opportunity for actual, real, forced transformation, meaning transformation, real, meaningful, durable transformation doesn't happen usually as an option. It happens because companies and people and professions realize they can't survive without it. And so I do find that we are at an inflection point in the world, probably to some degree catalyzed by COVID, but it was in play long before COVID. Where we are going to most likely all have to transform. Jobs are going to become different. Companies are going to operate differently. Even the idea that in this world of buy, build, borrow, bounce, bot, all that stuff, for decades, the answer was mostly talent acquisition. If you need something and you don't have it, go hire it. Mm-hmm. But guess what? The generational shifts in the global labor force are very clearly telling us you can't buy it all anymore. It isn't there now, and it's definitely not going to be there in the future. So build and bot and other things are becoming much bigger levers that have to be pulled, and companies don't know how to pull those. They are just, their muscle memory is around buy. I'll just go hire it. Well, that's not working for everybody anymore, especially in some of the most advanced, technological skills. And so now we're going to have to exercise a lot of muscles that maybe have never been exercised before. And we're going to become much better athletes in the end for doing that. It's going to hurt, but I think it's a very exciting time. I'm so happy to be running a company and in a leadership role like many of you at a time like this, because it is not a quiet time. It's a very exciting time.
And any concern, what would be your biggest concern?
Yeah, the toddler is a concern in that, like I said before, it is a tool, and it is a tool that can be used for incredible insight and power and that kind of thing. But the reality is everybody's going around pushing buttons thinking they have it mastered, and no one has it mastered, because this isn't really, to say to a room like this seems a little bit controversial, and running a company that provides external market labor data, it's also controversial. But this is not as much about data as it is about the human skills needed to interpret it in a meaningful way. And everybody's getting their hands on data. Everybody talks about the democratization of data, and everybody talks about, well, ChatGPT can just go get me this from all over the world, and they can make really bad decisions if they don't understand how to take data and translate it into meaningful, accurate insights. Not all data is good data. AI hallucinates a ton, and in some ways, making $1 billion decision based on bad data is almost worse than making it based on no data at all. And so there's a tremendous potential for a lot of bad thinking to find its way into, kind of pseudo-scientific approaches, and it's going to confuse everybody. So I think that's my one caution, is that the skilled folks in this room and our colleagues who aren't here today that in the same profession, you all understand the crossroads of actual data, how to make data into good usable data, and then really the human application of interpretation and context. That's really where the skill lives. But we're all going to get outnumbered by amateurs who are just trying to do this on their own, and they're going to get it wrong a lot.
Bridie, I'll come to you. Same question. What excites you most? Biggest concern? You might play a little bit off what you've just heard from Julie.
Yeah, I think it's quite similar, actually. I'm excited about where we're sitting in people analytics. Everything we've been working on over the last 10, 15 years has brought us to here. And I think the advent of these technologies, which were always going to come, is really, exciting for us as a function, because we will just become more and more integral to making sure that our organization and workforce are prepared, but also that the HR function is effective and prepared for this as well. It leads a little bit to my concern. Do we have the skills across the HR function and in our own teams to ready our organizations for this? I think that's something that keeps me a little bit awake at night. But at the same time, that's an opportunity that we really want to grab. And the same old challenges are going to come in with privacy and all those things. And I think, is that going to hold us back in the application of this in the people space? So we really have to think carefully about how we can strike the right balance between using and grabbing and enabling the power of these technologies, but also keeping it safe in terms of privacy and accurate outcomes.
Anthony, I'll come to you, and then Jane, maybe we'll ask you from a perspective, from a CHRO perspective, about the excites and concerns. But
I'm excited about all the new technology, the growth in that area. I think it's just going to bring us even closer to being that strategic enabler, that strategic driver for our employees, organization, strategy, roadmap, those sorts of things. It creates more time for us to do those things. I think many of the presenters talked about how much time we're spending with the data and not enough time with the components that really show those deciders about like where people analytics should be at the table. I don't think we're doing enough of that because we don't have the time to be able to do that, but we're getting better at it. We're getting better at automating those things. We're getting better vendors and technology, Gen AI. I'm excited about that, but I'm not sure how I'm excited about that yet. So those are really exciting things. Just being able to focus more on those strategic initiatives and those partnerships, those conversations with the right people at the right time, at the right place, are so incredibly important. And I'm seeing that every year. It's getting closer and closer and closer, and some of us have really gotten there. On the dark side of it, I think Cole made that easy for us earlier today. I think he's right. Whether the data is questionable or not, I think that call to arms is certainly warranted. I am not the type of person that waits for something to happen to me. I prefer to control my future, my destiny, and I think what he talked about, whether the data was right or not, I think there's debate around that. But I get along with Cole so well because I think we think about this very like-minded, is that there are opportunities that we have that often I see in some situations let go by us. And I think we need to catch those. I think we need to do something about it. We need to show more and more the value, apply how it's impacting, the business. If we don't do that, I think we're just going to ebb and flow, like he said, with the market.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Cole said earlier on was, don't focus on being nice to have. It's got have to have. And I guess, obviously there are some organizations that have proved that. They've proved that you have to have people analytics and it can deliver business impact and value for employees, but not every people analytics function has done that. And maybe that's why some of those numbers have happened, in comparison to payroll, for example, because everyone knows you need a payroll team. If people don't get paid, you've got anarchy. Talk about toddlers, my God, you'd have real anarchy if you didn't pay people. So quite interesting. Jane, love to hear your perspective, with your CHRO hat on, what excites you most about the future of work, but what's your biggest concern?
So I would say that I think we are at a pivot point in human capital where we can actually almost redefine the role of the human capital office it feels different now with AI around us than it has in the past. For instance, I do think that the ability to take data in these large language models and make some sense of it and pull stuff out really fast will help us. We have to be careful, but it will help us solve some of the most pernicious problems we've had in HR, such as matching talent to task. It's just, I mean, the volumes of applicants to opportunities is so great that has always been one of those things that has dogged us as a human capital professional. I care about that a lot. I also think that there is... we started the 2 days with talking about levels of effort in analytics and whether or not it was worthwhile taking on small things that you could get to fast versus larger things that you had to wait to see whether they would have, a good output. Well, guess what? In some respects, especially with generative AI, there's experiments going on. Like if NASA has 18,000 employees, there are 18,000 experiments going on right now. And what I mean by that is people are, just like they did with the internet when it first came in, and I remember that too. Believe it or not, I date myself. But the idea was that people were figuring out how they could use this to make their jobs different and get things that were hard to do to be done more easily so that they could focus on things that were more important overall. And I think there's great promise in allowing us to reshape how we use the human talent that we have in a way that's quite efficient. And we have to do it well. And I think human capital's role in that is not necessarily to control the experiments, but to make sure that we are doing them properly and with kind of an ethical base to them, so that we're not going off the rails and, deciding to dispense with all of this type of employee before we've actually figured out whether the roles that they played were actually effectively replaced by whatever has come. The last point I want to make, and this kind of gets to the area of, it's not even concern, but more like, I don't know what I don't know, which could be a concern. And that is for services where the automation, the agents are playing roles that we fundamentally see as being human roles to play. So if I think about Anna Tavis's discussion about, coaching at scale, where you have, an AI agent who becomes your coach, that is something that has very human. And it's, so we as human capital professionals need to understand what that looks like that's good, and how we can do that in a way that feels ethical and safe. I mean, it's exciting, and it's also a tad scary, honestly. But it really is a way in which, if we think about human capital and sorry, that's my term for HR in the federal government, we call them human capital. It's the way for HR professionals to really understand what workload is and how it gets done by these different actors, and whether or not the mix is right, and whether the transition is good, and whether there's an ethical foundation for all of it. So,
some great perspectives there from the panelists. Let's open it up now for questions. If you've got questions for the panelists, or maybe perspectives yourselves that you might want to share with the group. So, the usual thing. If you put your hands up. Oh, yes, let's go.
Yeah, it's working. There. So going back to the toddler analogy, I think it's wonderful. I'm gonna use it. Who do you think should be the nanny? The reason being, too many cooks can also spoil. Yeah. And hence, who do you think, from a people analytics perspective, which has an extremely touch-sensitive piece, the nanny should be, or should be playing the role of nanny? Now, it shouldn't be multiple people as well, but would love to hear your perspective or the panel's perspective.
Well, you've heard it takes a village, right, to raise a toddler. I think this community is in a very specifically strong position to help keep that toddler thriving and growing and emerging in a healthy way without completely going out of control, because you do already have a unique skill set that is the intersection between, data and meaning, and any new early technology is likely to take off on the fuel of data but not quite understand the meaning yet. Right, so I think that's where the first frontier of governance comes in play. Is, where is the line between just the bits and bytes and ones and zeros and actual meaning that is both valid and useful? And so I think part of the nanny, I think the nanny isn't one role, but I think the nanny is partly here because you already have in this community an acumen that is not prevalent in a lot of the stakeholder groups within these companies. And they're going to be looking to this community to help understand what should we do and what could we do and what can't we do and where should we be doing it and where are we close or already doing it, et cetera. But I think it's everybody's responsibility, those that are playing around with Python scripts right now and whatever, as well as those that are trying to paint the big picture with gigantic data sets and they're using a new growing toolkit. I think it's all of our responsibility to figure out where the line is drawn, even to your point about like how far is too far before you have robots doing something that something with a soul should be doing. And it's going to be really easy to get carried away. We're probably going to get carried away. And then something bad is going to happen and everyone's going to pull it a little bit back. And I think that's fine. I think that's how these things emerge.
And Friday, you talked yesterday, I think, a little bit around responsible AI, and maybe there's an element of that collective nanny. We're really using these analogies now, aren't we? Which does help a little bit. I don't know if you want to talk to that, because I think yesterday when we did the panel that we only had half the room, didn't we?
Yeah, so we have a cross-functional group of leadership that advise the executive team on this, from security, legal, privacy, etc. Because no one person should be responsible for this. If a business leader thinks this is going to solve a problem in their business or for their type of customer, they're going to want to do it, right? So I think as an organization, even more so, but always we've had to look at this from different angles and balance risk versus opportunity for your organization. So that's how we're tackling it. And I also agree, we all have a responsibility. Everybody in the company has a responsibility to think thoughtfully about this, either in your daily work or as your job. But I think the way we need to approach it is through governance, because it's not going to come from outside, and regulation has a bit of time to catch up.
Dirk, I think you've got a question.
Yeah, just maybe, Bridie, because you've worked on both sides of the Atlantic, right? And I do wonder whether it isn't sufficient to put it onto the shoulders of each company, because this is a system. AI is a system that has almost unlimited potential to do good and therefore also to do harm. So the let's fix it when it goes wrong may be too late, because it may just be too big a problem that it creates. So do we, in this case, really need what is happening in Europe now, really regulation across all, that it kind of doesn't put the burden on each organization?
I think there's probably a lot of smarter people than me thinking about this, but I always talk about GDPR. It leveled the playing field. Europe has always put the human first. That's in the culture and in the history, and I think that has done a good job. Does it stop some of the commercial aspects? Yeah, it can do, but it's keeping things safe as safe as possible. I think the US has been the opposite, but you're seeing some catch up in certain states. I think the challenge for us now is that different states have different leveling, and that's becoming a little bit complicated, which was the reason that GDPR was brought in the first place, to set a common standard across the EU. And then, of course, different countries have different legislation aside from that. I'm an advocate of regulation, just because I think it's important, and because I grew up professionally in Europe, and I can see how it can help you to move fast if the rules are clear. Because if the rules aren't clear, then everybody plays in the gray, right? And that usually takes more time and more evaluation for your appetite.
And no one wants to be the company that does make the mistake. So hence you need that internal governance as well. Any other views from the panel before to see if there's any other questions on that topic?
I generally agree with that, Dirk. The way that I look at it is that we have this technology that essentially is making a decision by itself. I mean, it's a very narrow type of technology currently. It will grow. It'll become, what do they call it, super intelligent AI or something like that. But when somebody interacts with it and asks a question or asks it to do something, it's essentially making a decision that we're used to making with context. And I don't think Gen AI is at that point where we can just let it roll and do and make all the decisions it should. Maybe it's just the paranoid Tony talking, but I really do think that in this particular case, maybe some government regulations might be a smart move.
I highly doubt that in the U.S. regulation is coming soon.
Yeah.
If anything, given the current political climate, and doesn't matter what side of the spectrum anybody's on, there is such a deep divide. I can't imagine something that is this complex getting to any kind of like meaningful consensus regulatory body. I think there will be a point at which we'll probably follow Europe to some degree, or we will reach a tipping point of, X number of states in the US have enacted their own thing. It just becomes unwieldy. And then it's a matter of practicality. But at the federal government level, I wouldn't hold our breaths for them to come out and say, okay, here are the rules of the road. They're just not poised to do that at this point. And so I think we are going to have to figure it out for ourselves. For a while.
I would also say that having it be the responsibility of not just the government writ large, but the governance within an organization means they have to take ownership for it and they have to be accountable. And that is important. Because yes, there's accountability when you talk about legislation at the federal level, but it takes a long while for that to catch up. So you really need it embedded in your organizations to learn quickly when things go wrong, and to make sure that there is enough oversight of what's happening that you can arrest issues before they become really big.
I think it's safe to say that if Barry organises a People Analytics World in the US next year, we'll be talking about this topic a lot, and for the year after that, and for the year after that, as this continues to evolve. I want to say a big thank you to Jane, Bridie, Tony, and Julie for being on the panel. Thank you. And that just falls to me almost as the best man at the wedding to say thank you to everyone. So I will be saying a list of thank yous now before I send you all on your way. So firstly, again, thanks to the panel. Thanks to all the speakers over the 2 days. Thanks to Michael. I think she's had to leave. Thanks to Michael for chairing the Impact Room. Thank you as well, obviously, to the sponsors. These events don't happen, as I said this morning and yesterday morning, these events don't happen without the sponsors. And a lot of the innovation in this space is happening through the vendor community. So thank you very much to all the sponsors. Thank you to, there's Barry, and there he is. There's Barry. So lots of people have come up to me over the 2 days and said, this is an excellent program. Thank you for putting it on. I'm not taking the credit for it because I don't devise the program. Barry and his team devised the program. So thank you much for Barry. And thank you very much to the AV team and all the People Analytics World and Takana team for managing all the logistics over the last 2 days and ensuring us always having a safe and great time as well, with some great food and some great refreshments as well. So thank you, everyone. And the last thank you is for you, the audience. We had, I think, about 300 people here over the two. I'm looking at Barry for nodding, which is fantastic for the first People Analytics World in the US in New York. I'm sure Barry is already thinking about coming back next year. He's nodding. So thank you very much to all of you. Really participative audience. Brilliant questions. Thank you.